Walk into any modern survival store, and you'll see walls of gear promising to save your life. Multi-tools with 30 functions, high-tech filters, tactical gadgets marketed as essential. History tells a very different story. For most of human survival, people didn't rely on specialized equipment. They relied on a small number of tools that worked across environments, generations, and crises. When supply chains collapsed, when armies were cut off, when exploration went wrong, survival depended on tools that were simple, repairable, and adaptable. The uncomfortable truth is that most modern survival gear solves imagined problems, while history's survivors trusted tools that solved real ones. The knife sits at the center of nearly every historical survival account for a reason. Not because it was deadly, but because it was productive. A good blade processed food, made shelter, repaired equipment, and shaped other tools. It was maintained endlessly rather than replaced. Historically, knives were valued less for sharpness out of the box and more for how easily they could be resharpened. The lesson here is durability and maintainability matter more than features. A tool that can be restored indefinitely outlasts one that works perfectly once. Fire-starting tools come next, and history consistently favored reliability over novelty. Flint and steel, friction methods, and later simple ferro rods worked because they had no moving parts and tolerated abuse. Fire meant warmth, water purification, food preparation, and signaling. What history teaches is redundancy of method, not redundancy of gadgets. Survivors knew at least 2 ways to make fire using minimal materials. The skill mattered more than the tool itself. Containers mattered as much as weapons. Pots, kettles, and canteens were survival multipliers because they allowed transport and treatment of water. Archaeological records show that cooking vessels often outlasted weapons in use. The practical insight is clear. Hydration and nutrition kill faster than exposure or predators. A simple metal container that could be heated, cleaned, and repaired was trusted across centuries for a reason. Cordage, is one of those survival tools that's been historically underestimated. Rope, twine, sinew, and fiber bindings. These were the unsung heroes that enabled shelter construction, repairs, traps, and load-bearing. Unlike today's obsession with paracord, a historical cordage was valued for its availability and adaptability. People back then knew how to make it from plants, animal fibers, or even scavenged materials. The real lesson here is that knowing how to create cordage is far more important than just carrying large quantities of it. Cutting tools beyond knives, well, they mattered too. Axes and hatchets appear consistently in frontier records because they processed fuel and shelter far faster than any blade alone could. Sure, they were heavy, but their efficiency more than justified the weight. History repeatedly shows us that energy expenditure is a critical survival factor. Tools that reduce effort, conserve calories, and extend endurance, which is absolutely vital. Needles and simple sewing tools, you might find it surprising, appear often in survival narratives. Clothing repair was essential to prevent exposure, infection, and long-term injury. Soldiers, explorers, and civilians managed to survive harsh winters and forced marches not due to better weapons, but because they could maintain what they wore. The practical takeaway here is that understanding maintenance prevents emergencies more effectively than just reacting to them. Light sources mattered long before electricity. You see, candles, oil lamps, and later simple lanterns extended productive hours and improved morale. More importantly, they reduced injury. Working in darkness causes mistakes, and mistakes in survival contexts cascade quickly. History valued steady, low-maintenance light rather than brightness or range. Navigation tools, especially simple compasses and maps, consistently appear in survival accounts. Getting lost was often fatal long before starvation or combat. The takeaway here is orientation matters more than speed. Survivors move deliberately, not quickly, because knowing where you are determines every other decision. Hand tools like chisels, awls, and small pry tools show up repeatedly in archaeological and military records. These were not glamorous, but they enabled construction, repair, and improvisation. Modern survival kits often ignore these in favor of novelty items. History did not. Medical tools were, simple but absolutely critical. Tourniquets, bandages, and just basic implements often prevented small injuries from becoming, lethal. The real lesson here isn't advanced medicine, but rather early intervention. Survivors back then understood that infection and blood loss were enemies long before modern understanding even existed. Storage tools like bags, packs, and baskets, these were true survival enablers. Being able to carry more safely meant fewer trips and, honestly, less exposure to danger. Historically, load management actually determined how far people could travel and how much they could sustain themselves. Finally, sharpening tools definitely deserve a bit of attention. Whetstones and files show up consistently because, let's face it, a dull tool is just a liability. Maintenance, once again, proves absolutely central. History really trusted tools that could be renewed. What all 12 of these tools share isn't sophistication, but longevity. They worked across climates, conflicts, and cultures. They didn't depend on batteries, proprietary parts, or marketing claims. For modern survivalists, the lesson isn't to reject new gear entirely, but to, prioritize tools that history has already stress-tested under failure conditions. If you value serious historical insight over gear hype, do subscribe to Strange History. Share this episode with others who care about real survival lessons and keep learning from the past instead of, just marketing copy.